0300 hours. Portsmouth. The first Calibre cruise missile crossed the British coastline at an altitude of 30 meters, its terrain following guidance system threading it between radar coverage gaps that Russian electronic intelligence had been mapping for 18 months. The second and third arrived within 4 seconds of the first. By the time the dockyard's emergency systems had finished processing the initial impact, 8 of the 12 missiles launched from the Admiral Essen had already reached their designated targets. The steel infrastructure of one of NATO's most historically significant naval bases was burning before a single fire team had reached their station. This was not a conventional opening move, it was a demonstration, a deliberate public declaration that the Kremlin had crossed the threshold between posturing and action, and that its intention was to sever the transatlantic resupply architecture that NATO's defense of Europe depends upon entirely. The remaining 4 missiles were the part that should have concerned the NATO watch officers most. They disappeared from the radar display of the USCGC Monroe, not because they were destroyed, not because they malfunctioned, but because their radar transponders went deliberately silent at a pre-programmed coordinate. To an operator watching a screen, a contact that stops producing a return looks like a kill. It is also what a weapon looks like when it has been instructed to deceive its pursuers. The 4 missiles had not been lost. They had gone hunting somewhere the radar was no longer looking. The Admiral Essen itself contributed to the deception through its own behavior. The frigate made itself conspicuous, broadcasting strong electronic signatures, maintaining active radar emissions that any escort destroyer in the area could lock onto, and making course changes that drew the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the screening formation into a high-speed chase northeast along the mid-Atlantic ridge. In Russian naval doctrine, this technique carries its own designation, maskirovka, the elaborate art of making the enemy see what you want him to see while concealing what actually matters. The Admiral Essen was the hand waving in front of the audience's face. 300 meters below the North Atlantic, the Yasen-class nuclear submarine was the other hand. For veterans watching this, people who have spent years reading the ocean, understanding what a ship sounds like when it's running scared versus running with purpose, knowing the difference between chaos and orchestrated misdirection, leave a 1 in the comments. You understand exactly what the Russian admiral was building here, and you recognize the cold precision underneath it. The Yasen class is a formidable vessel by any honest assessment. At 13,800 tons submerged displacement, carrying a primary armament of 40 warheads across its vertical launch magazines, it represents the Russian Navy's most sophisticated attempt to build a platform that can deny NATO freedom of operation across the North Atlantic. Its anechoic coating absorbs sonar returns. Its pump jet propulsor replaces conventional propellers with a system that generates significantly less cavitation noise at operational speeds. Its acoustic signature, in normal operating conditions, sits near the threshold of what passive sonar arrays can reliably detect at extended range. To amplify that advantage, the Yasen's crew had deployed a network of acoustic decoy buoys in the waters ahead and behind their track, devices that flood the surrounding ocean with broadband white noise, degrading the signal-to-noise ratio for any passive sonar system within range. The RAF P-8A Poseidon aircraft working the anti-submarine patrol above was, from the Russian perspective, receiving a deliberately constructed acoustic fog. The submarine's crew believed the Poseidon was hunting blind. They had fundamentally misread what the P-8A's AI-assisted processing system was actually doing. The aircraft had not been trying to find the Yasen through conventional sonar return analysis. It had shifted its operating logic entirely. Rather than searching for the submarine's direct acoustic signature against the noise floor, a search the decoy buoys were specifically designed to defeat, the P-8A's processing system was cataloging patterns. Every warship in active service has what acoustic engineers call a mechanical fingerprint. The specific harmonic frequencies generated by its cooling pumps, the resonance characteristics of its reactor systems, the precise timing signature of its propulsor under varying load conditions. These signatures are not loud. They sit far below the threshold of conventional detection. But they are consistent, repeatable, and unique to individual vessels. The U.S. Navy's Acoustic Intelligence Library had been building a profile of the Yasen class for years, collecting data from observation operations, from signals intercepts, from analysis of Russian naval exercise patterns. The AI processing aboard the P-8A was not looking for a submarine. It was looking for a specific set of mechanical rhythms that matched a known profile, buried inside the noise environment the Russian decoy buoys had created. It peeled the acoustic layers back one frequency band at a time. Commercial shipping noise, biological sources, storm-generated ambient pressure, until what remained was a faint, slow-moving mechanical signature with a harmonic relationship that matched a Yasen-class reactor cooling system operating at low power. The Yasen was found not despite the acoustic masking the Russian crew had deployed, but through analysis of what remained after that masking was computationally removed. NATO did not announce this. The submarine's position, depth, course, and speed were encoded and transmitted via encrypted link to the Monroe. The hunting operation that followed was designed not to sink the submarine, but to use it. The Monroe executed what its commanding officer later described as the death act. The cutter cut propulsion, killed its deck lighting, and allowed its electronic systems to broadcast a chaotic, irregular signal pattern, consistent with a vessel that had absorbed significant damage from the Caliber strike sequence. To a submarine commander at periscope depth reading the electronic picture, the Monroe looked like a crippled American vessel, an opportunity not merely to complete a tactical objective, but to document the visible failure of NATO's defensive posture for purposes that would serve the Kremlin's propaganda requirements for months afterward. The Yasen's captain took the bait and rose to periscope depth. Above him, an MH-60R Night Stalker helicopter appeared over the wave crests at 500 feet, rotors audible through the submarine's hull, searchlights sweeping the water, a presence designed to fill every Russian sensor array with noise and motion pointed skyward, absorbing the crew's threat assessment attention. What the Russian crew did not know, could not have known from any information available to them at periscope depth, was that 16 operators from SEAL Team 6 had entered the water 2 hours and 40 minutes earlier from a SEAL delivery vehicle launched from a host submarine tracking the Yasen throughout its approach. NATO intelligence had spent 48 hours analyzing the Yasen's operational rhythm, studying the intervals at which the crew opened torpedo tube outer doors for routine ventilation and maintenance cycling, a procedural requirement that created a brief, repeatable window of hull access that the boat's designers had never conceived of as a threat vector. 16 men in full closed-circuit rebreather gear, generating no exhaust bubbles, making no acoustic signature detectable above the noise floor of the helicopter's rotor wash above them, entered through that window and moved through the lower decks using knowledge of the Yasen's interior layout that had been assembled from technical intelligence sources, defector debriefs, and digital modeling. They did not fire a shot. They did not need to. The internal communication system went down first, isolated from within, using override procedures derived from the specific firmware version running on that submarine's control architecture. Then the launch authorization pathway for the vertical launch magazines was locked using codes that had been generated for this operation based on intelligence about the system's encryption architecture. Then the reactor control interface was disabled, not in a way that would cause an uncontrolled shutdown, but in a way that removed the crew's ability to use it as a tool for any offensive purpose. The 13,800-ton vessel that had been positioned to threaten the Atlantic resupply corridor, that had successfully evaded acoustic detection through sophisticated masking technology, that had been moments away from documenting what its captain believed was an American defeat, was neutralized from the inside by 16 people carrying decryption tools and enough knowledge of the boat's systems to walk its corridors without a map. The hatch in the command tower did not open because it was forced from outside. It opened because the crew inside understood what had happened and had no remaining options. What failed was not the Yasen's engineering. The anechoic coding worked. The pump jet operated within its designed acoustic parameters. The decoy boys did exactly what they were supposed to do. The systems performed. The platform failed because it was designed as a standalone weapon in an era when the decisive contest is no longer between platforms, but between networks. The Russian approach to naval power remains organized around the concept of the decisive instrument, the weapon so individually capable that its performance characteristics alone determine the outcome of an engagement. The Yasen represents the highest expression of that philosophy, a vessel optimized at every design parameter for individual lethality and survivability. Each technical choice made during its construction was evaluated against the question of how it would perform as a singular actor. American naval development has been organized around a different question for the past 2 decades. How does this platform contribute to and benefit from a continuously updated shared operational picture? The P-8A did not defeat the Yasen's acoustic masking through superior sonar hardware. It defeated it through an AI processing architecture fed by decades of accumulated acoustic intelligence stored in networked libraries that update with every operational deployment. The MH-60R was not the primary threat to the Russian crew. It was a noise source deliberately positioned to redirect their attention. The SEALs were not an improvised response. They were the physical execution of a plan developed in digital simulation environments that had been running scenarios against a model of the Yasin's interior and operational procedures for months before the mission launched. The submarine never fought the P-8A or the helicopter or the operators who boarded it. It fought the network that connected all of them, and that fight was over before the Yasin cleared its home port. There is a human dimension to this asymmetry that matters as much as the technical one. Russian crews are trained to operate a vessel, to understand its systems, maintain its readiness, execute its doctrinal employment. American operators are trained to operate within a system, to understand how their platform's sensors and outputs feed into a larger data environment, what information they are contributing to and receiving from the network, and how to adapt when the network reveals that the situation is different from what doctrine anticipated. The Yasin's crew encountered a threat that their training did not contain a response for, because their training had been built around a model of the battlespace that assumed their acoustic masking made them effectively invisible. When the masking failed, not through a hardware defeat but through a processing methodology they hadn't anticipated, they had no adaptive framework available to them. The deep ocean, which Soviet naval doctrine had established as the sanctuary that made nuclear submarine forces the ultimate strategic deterrent, has become the environment in which that deterrence is most vulnerable. In the era of passive acoustic detection, depth and silence were genuine protection. The ocean's size and complexity provided natural cover that technology could not overcome. In the current era, the ocean's complexity is the raw material that AI processing systems use to find what they are looking for, not an obstacle to that search. The very noise environment the Yasin's crew had augmented with their decoy buoys became the dataset from which their mechanical fingerprint was extracted. This does not make the Yasin obsolete. It makes the doctrine surrounding it obsolete. A platform of that capability integrated into a network architecture that provides it with continuously updated situational awareness and connects it to assets that can extend its reach and protect its flanks would represent a different kind of threat entirely. Russia's investment pattern, building increasingly sophisticated individual platforms without investing at equivalent scale in the network architecture that would allow those platforms to operate coherently, creates a widening gap between what the hardware can theoretically do and what it can actually accomplish against an adversary whose platforms are individually somewhat less capable but collectively far more coherent. The Kremlin's confidence in hypersonic weapons as a category, Zircon, Avangard, Kinjal, follows the same pattern. Each system is presented as individually capable of defeating American defensive architecture. The actual contest, when it occurs, will not be between a single hypersonic weapon and a single interceptor. It will be between the weapon and the distributed networked engagement architecture that includes Aegis ashore installations, Flight 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers carrying SM-6 interceptors, space-based tracking systems, and AI-assisted fire control that begins computing intercept solutions the moment a launch is detected. That architecture updates with every exercise, every simulation, every operational deployment. The missiles it faces do not update themselves. 16 people in the North Atlantic, inside a steel hull designed to be impenetrable, secured a nuclear submarine without a casualty on either side. The operation was not a demonstration of physical superiority. It was the physical expression of an information advantage that had been built over years and maintained through continuous investment in exactly the kind of distributed, adaptive, network-centric capability that individual platform excellence cannot defeat. The Atlantic is quieter tonight than it was 24 hours ago. The Yasin's berth in its home port is occupied again. The Monroe is back on patrol. The P-8A has logged its mission data into the acoustic library, and somewhere in a secure processing environment, the data is already improving the next detection algorithm. The board is never reset, the eyes do not close, and the network remembers everything. What do you think? Does the Yasin engagement prove that no matter how advanced a platform becomes, a submarine operating without real-time network connectivity is fundamentally isolated in a way that makes it tactically predictable? Or is there an asymmetric doctrine, patient, minimal signature, seabed-anchored operations like the Ghadir in Hormuz that still represents a genuine threat to this kind of network dominance? And was the decision not to sink the Yasin the most strategically significant choice made in this entire operation? The complete absence of a wreck means Moscow cannot be certain what was taken from those systems before the crew regained control. Drop your analysis in the comments. This community's strategic thinking is what makes these breakdowns worth doing.